What's new in CPD? This programme covers GDC Standard 7. Welcome to the CPD programme for dental professionals. Before we start today's CPD session, please ensure that you have downloaded all your course materials from your online folder. This will include your course notes, your CPD questions, your professional development plan form, and your PowerPoint and evaluation. At the end of the session, you will need to complete the questions and the evaluation. These completed forms should be then uploaded to your online folder, and then you will receive your certificate of CPD.
During last year, the GDC ran a consultation with the profession about CPD, and if anybody had a look at that online and answered some of the questions, it started to give you a clue to what they were thinking and where they were planning to take things. Alongside getting the consultation from registrants, they were actually talking to an organisation called PARN, and they're an organisation that take an overview of professional development in all of the professions, and they gather information so they learn from one another. So the new proposals for CPD that came out of the consultation and also came out of the work that they did with PARN is that they have decided that from now on any sort of decisions that are made about CPD are going to have to be based on planning and reflection. What happened during the last cycle, particularly for the DCPs, was that people got to the end of the cycle and then panicked to cram in as much CPD as they needed within their cycle. And that really doesn't make it continuous development. It makes it a sudden jolt of input, which may or may not have made any difference to the way that they work in their day-to-day practice and the care of patients. So one of the things that they were insistent of with the new way of doing things is that CPD will be planned in a cycle for 5 years of the cycle that each person goes into. So that is one thing that is going to be very different, and that was very clearly the plan when you look at the consultation questions that they asked. They also say that the CPD that's done must be directly linked to the standards that they've set. So instead of choosing the subjects that you do, they're going to be a lot more prescriptive in what you need to cover. If you have a look at this handout that I've given you here, you will see that in the table at the bottom of the page, it sets out the CPD hours, which haven't changed. That won't come as any surprise to you. But instead of having the verifiable and the core and the non-verifiable, now what they're telling us is that in the first category here, from 1 to 3, those CPD subjects must be covered each year. So every single year there's a requirement to do 2 hours medical emergencies, and that is across the entire team. It's not just for the registrants, it's for a reception staff. Anybody that works within the team environment needs to cover that too. Again, no surprise that an hour of decontamination training is going to be required. Each April there tends to be something that comes out from the HTM that gives more detail, more information, more requirements for decontamination. This April it was the HTM 0701, which gives a little bit more detail about disposable things, waste, and also a little bit more detail about how they require you to put on and take off your PPE. A little bit patronising perhaps, but the fact is that it's specific and it's set out. And again, these are the sorts of updates that would be expected to be covered in that hour of decontamination CPD.
That's what PPE is?
Personal protective equipment, masks, gloves, aprons, anything else that you wear there. They're very keen that people that are wearing them aren't contaminating as a result of perhaps using gloves when they go out into reception areas and things like that. Things that everybody knows. This is why I feel that perhaps what's in that isn't that different to what we've already got, but they're just they're specifying it. And I think the point is that they're also, as well as using these standards as a way to drive forward in the profession, they're also going to be using these standards to make judgments when people fall short of the standards and they're called before the GDC. Okay, and the third one that needs to have a regular update will be the radiography, and that again I suppose is going to be most about risk assessment, quality management, making sure that x-rays have a process from being taken to being on the patient's file that ensure that they're of good quality, etc. So those are three subjects which every single year of your 5-year cycle you need to have an input. 2 hours for the medical emergencies and an hour for the others. Then there are another 3 subjects which you're expected to cover, and over the cycle an hour a year would be useful, but it's the continuous aspect of it being embedded throughout your professional life that they're driving at here. But subjects to be covered, legal and ethical issues, which this would come under, so you'll have that hour for this year after today's session. Complaints handling and oral cancer early detection. That at the moment is a bit of a buzz title, isn't it? And no doubt perhaps over time that might be replaced with other things that are sort of the issue of the day. Alongside that, there's also requirements to cover the aspects of the standards for the dental team. So putting patients first and the other things that are so familiar to us. Again, the standards haven't changed in terms of what they cover. What they have changed is the amount of detail that they've given us. To require us to behave in very specific ways. I mean, basically, they're just a lot more prescriptive. So, just to go over the points here, these are the points that the GDC makes about CPD for the future. The importance of making the decisions ahead of time, so you've got a plan, a training plan in place, and you know what you're going to learn as you start the CPD cycle. The CPD must meet the standards, that means following the table there. It must be embedded throughout your professional life, that means that you don't get to the end of the cycle and then go for it full pelt and put in as much as you can. And they should enable the GDC to have regular quality assurance of CPD so that they can assure the public that registrants are keeping up to date. What the people at PALM, which is the research into ethical practice in the professions, have recommended, and the GDC have accepted, is that a much better and more comprehensive way of doing CPD is not to measure the time that you spent doing it, but the effect that the time you spent doing it has had on the way that you care for patients. So what they're doing now is changing from an input measured CPD system to an output measured CPD system. And again, within this pro forma that I've given you here, it sets out a number of things that you would need to do at the beginning of the year, perhaps as part of an appraisal, and it also means that perhaps that the clinicians, the dentists, the hygienists need to have some form of peer assessment so that you can actually have some useful feedback about your performance in particular areas. But having that sort of assessment at the beginning of the year to determine what you hope to learn from the CPD that you do, and this is what output measured CPD really and truly needs. If we look at CPD and think about how it's affected the way that care is delivered to patients, and look over almost a 40-year cycle here, where you see in 1975 there was no profession that actually required people to do CPD. And I can remember working in those days, and I can remember working for a dentist who was coming up to retirement. He'd taken his father's practice on, so everything in the practice was probably coming on for 60 or 70 years old. And the way that he would do things was so short of what we would expect these days. And the reason that it had stayed the way that it was in his father's day was because there was no need within the profession to keep up to date and do the things that were happening elsewhere. By the 1970s, there was an awful lot going on in dentistry, a lot of changes that starts with the dentistry we recognise now. But this dentist was still sterilising with Dettol. And he was using needles which weren't disposable. We would have people queuing up in the street outside every Monday morning waiting for GAs. And they would be strapped into a chair. I mean, it was barbaric, but there was nobody, there was no authority, there was nothing to say that that was anything other than the way that dentistry should be done. You didn't wear gloves, and if there was blood clots in the sink, you would expect you to put your finger in and sort of move them on down. You know, it is horrible to think about it, but it's where we've come from to where we are today. Now, there's a good argument to say that where does this stop? It can't go on and on and on and on forever, but the point is, the sort of CPD that we're doing now is ensuring that those sorts of dentists can't continue to do what they were doing before. And of course, it's not the CPD on its own, but it is all part of an overall picture. And then, as you see over the years, it's grown very steadily, with the most recent figures in 2013 saying that 80% of professional people have now got a requirement to do CPD across all professions, that is. Some more research now this is all more recent really, this is just since 2003, just to look at the sort of CPD that people are being asked to do. And as you'll see, by 2003, 42% of people were doing simply input measured CPD. That is simply a case of, yes, these are the hours that I've done, here are the certificates for the hours, send them off, okay, you've met your CPD requirement. And whether that person has stayed all the time or just signed out or signed in, whether that person has been awake during the session, certainly the times I've spoken at BDA conferences, particularly if you do the Saturday morning, people have had a ball on the Friday night. They come to the lectures on the Saturday morning to have a snooze. You know, they'll go away with input measured CPD for that. Will that make any difference to the way that they care for patients? I wouldn't have thought so at all. At that point, there was some output measured CPD, 15%, but that's actually doubled now across the board, whereas the input measured CPD is almost half. So there's a real mix here where you can start to see that there's a move towards, with all the professions, people having some really output, some sort of impact of the CPD measured, rather than just the fact that they've done it.
Can I ask you, are you going to go through output, or is that it, have you said?
No, I'll show you exactly what they mean by output measured. Yeah, okay, so that whole mixing, and then there's all the people that don't measure CPD at all, they just say, you've got to do it, and people are left to their own devices there. Output CPD means starting off with planning and reflection. And planning and reflection is setting down at the beginning of a cycle and saying, over this cycle, these are the basic requirements. And that is basic requirements. Now, what you'll see down there, especially for the dentist, is there's nothing on there that works within your speciality. So alongside the CPD that you do to keep up to date with your area of dentistry, you also need to do this as well. So that is perhaps something that's never been that clear in the past until you come to do it, I guess, when you start to recognise that is actually what you're doing. I think most dentists that work at the level that you do a lot more than this. But having said that, there are many dentists out there that will struggle to get in their hours. So it's a case really of sort of levelling the profession a little bit more than it has before. You need to have evidence of learning, so from that point of view there needs to be a way of measuring what you've taken away from the session. I know people that do online learning tend to have multiple choice questions to answer. Whether that is going to be the way forward, I'm not sure. I think there's a lot of argument that sometimes those multiple choice questions are just a matter of luck, and maybe people, even without going through the session, if they go straight to the multiple choice, can probably get a lot of the answers, which isn't actually measuring development, it's measuring what you knew at the beginning, isn't it? It would be interesting actually to take just random intelligent people off the street and say to them, you know, fill in this form and see what sort of scores you get, and see if they get the scores that say it was done. One of the points that was giving conflict at the GDC meeting was that they were basically saying to all the CPD providers, this is what we want, you work out how to deliver it. And they were saying, well, you know, you need to give us more information than that. And they're saying, no, that's what we want. It's done elsewhere. You sort it out and make it happen. So at the moment, the standards came out on the 14th September last year. By September this year, they'll be starting to expect people to be far more inclined to this sort of output evidence. What it means is being able to some extent to measure changes in working practice as a result of the CPD that you've completed. So that means equally starting off with a measure at the beginning before you do the course. And we're not talking so much clinical here as things that we're going to be talking about today, like consent. So, okay, so this GDC regulations, therefore, just to recap there, the input systems meant there were 1 to 5 year cycles where you did a specific number of hours of CPD, and the evidence of that was sent off to the GDC. Each thing that you do needed to have educational aims, and at the end of the day you fill in the sheet that says has it done that, and you would sign that and you would get your certificate, and that was really what was passing for outcomes and quality controls. One of the things that's looming large now is reaccreditation, and they've not said an awful lot about that, but it is definitely on the horizon. For the DCPs they think 2018, for the dentists obviously before that. The question is, how can an organisation like the GDC reaccredit all its registrants with the current setup that it's got? The one thing that they haven't got are the staff and the money to examine every single person that's registered to ensure that their standards are the standards that's required for registration, as they did when they qualified and went on the register in the first place. What it would seem is absolutely clear from what they're asking of us now is that this output measured CPD is going to be the basis of reaccreditation. So the better this is done, the more straightforward reaccreditation is going to be. I think they're going to struggle like that because most practices just are not going to be able to do it and produce the evidence.
Can you just explain what reaccreditation is?
Yeah, reaccreditation is used in a lot of professions, particularly medical professions. If you take the American model, for example, that people will get their initial qualification and that would enable them to be considered as a registrant. And this is the dental profession here. And rather than allowing people to continue to practice without any benchmarks of how they're developing and the quality of what they're doing 5, 10, 15, 20 years on, reaccreditation is some way of measuring the standard of the care that people are providing. Now, in some cases in nursing, people literally take another examination. Yeah. Will the GDC be able to do that? I doubt it. They know reaccreditation needs to be done, so this sort of measured CPD would seem to be a portal to that. And it will become more structured over a period of time, I'm sure. And I'm not saying that because I know, I'm saying that because I know how they work and I can see how everything that they do is done with a long-term goal in mind. Why would they make this big change and make these things happen unless there was a future purpose for it? And if you look at everything that's ever happened in the dental profession, really, things sort of cascade onto one another and create that domino effect. And that's where we're going with this. So say, the better that people get this in place now, the more straightforward it will be when this actually counts towards reaccreditation, not just CPD, but actually reaccreditation and measure. Okay, now, input measured CPD assumes that more hours means more learning, which in some cases it might do, but in other cases it very well may not do. It indicates that learning has taken place. it doesn't indicate that learning is taking place, because nobody's going to check the knowledge and understanding of it. Many years ago I used to work in a practice, and I used to take the x-rays on a regular basis before there was a qualification for dental nurses to do that. And then some GDC legislation came out that said only people that had taken the core of knowledge could do x-rays. So he comes along to me and he says, I've got to do this core of knowledge, you can come along with me so you can take my x-rays. And I sat in a physics lecture, not my subject at all, and listened to the physics of x-ray taking and everything to do with it for a whole day, and walked out with a core of knowledge. I knew nothing more than I knew when I went in, other than the fact that I'd sat for a whole day and looked at graphs and pictures and whatever. You know, the point is, it's not an indication of learning. I suppose I must have learned something, but probably not enough to say that I should have that core of knowledge. But then, you know, he just sort of put that forward, put it upon the wall. This person is qualified to take x-rays. No, not by today's standards. Certainly wasn't at that point. Input measure is easily quantifiable, so you say this is how much you've got to do, you can see whether you've done it or not, and it's cheap to implement and maintain, which obviously is an attraction to people that have got to invest money into their CPD. Then output CPD is a slightly different kettle of fish then. Outputs are auditable evidence. So if you start off at the beginning of the year with a list of topics, and it's not just the topics that you need to list. Have a look on the sheet here on the final page of it. Within your CPD plan, what you'll be doing is actually saying where the topics or where the CPD activities fit into the list on the front page, but also why did you choose to do this activity? What actually made you select this, and what did you expect to be able to get out of it? How will you use the learning for this particular CPD activity?
Who's going to mark this? Sorry, I'm being really...
So output measured CPD looks at the long-term consequences of the things that you do, and it all looks at the problems as well. You know, what resources do you require? When you're doing a gap analysis, for example, which again is included in this, this will be probably quite a tough one to do. Each of the sections in this are taken from the requirements and standards, absolutely directly, because the standards are set out in terms of... Do you want some notes? Okay, thanks. The standards are set out in terms of what the public expects, what you need to do, and then going into detail about how that can be measured. So there are 3 sections for each of it. Now this is set out in what you need to do. So each of these are things that you need to have some sort of measure of the extent to which you're doing this. And you may be doing a lot of things really well, but there may be other areas where you need to do things a little bit better. I mean, we have to be objective enough to be able to say, well, I am very good at this, but I'm not perfect.
So who scores? Do we score ourselves?
I think you should score yourselves initially, and then somebody in a peer review should work with you. I don't think it's something that anybody that doesn't literally do the same work that you do should be able to make judgments about.
So when you say peer review, within the practice, or an independent, like someone like you, or...
Well, no, it would need to be somebody that does
with you.
what you do, and works with you. So another dentist rather than a nurse. Just a little bit more of an explanation of input and output if one be needed, and you know the differences between the two. Whether you're going to do input or output, it begins with planning. I mean, that planning may be last minute reflex reaction, must get this stuff in before the end of the CPD cycle planning, or it may be sitting down thinking, what do I need to do, how can we improve the practice? But with the input measured, it's a smaller amount of planning. When you're going to do the output measured, you need to have this plan over a period of time where you've actually set within that when you're going to do things, and within the period of the 5 years it needs to be spread out, so you couldn't sort of go along to one CPD day and do the whole bang shoot lot and then leave it 12 months again. That's not what they're asking you to do. They're asking you to spread it out through each year of each 5-year cycle. No difference with outcomes. Outcomes have always been part of it. The aims and outcomes for any CPD that you do at the moment are clear. They have to be clear, they have to be agreed, they have to be subject to evaluation. But with output measured, the outcomes have to be much more specifically shown to have happened, rather than assume that they've happened because you've been to a session that's covered that. Reflection is the important thing here, and I know you're starting to do some quality circles within the practice, aren't you? I know it's not happened as well as it might.
We started off really well.
But there's quality circles really in reflection. They're the peer group reviews that maybe the specialists would have there, where you're just looking over the things and talking about the problems that you've had or things that you're doing well, so that you can share good practice. I mean, having opportunities to do that is very good. Some practices take a break in the morning, not specific to have peer review, but that's what happens. People talk about the things that have been happening in their day, and those are the sorts of reflections that they want to encourage a lot more of. Because when you're busy all the time, you come in the morning, you do your job, you finish, you rush off. Do you ever stop and reflect with the team that you work with on how things have been done and whether there's a way of making it better? And take action on those reflections. Staff meetings will be another way that you get the opportunity to reflect on what's happening. Some practices do a huddle at the beginning of the day, which is just really a sort of well. This person's coming in, where's the lab work, and all of that sort of thing. Reservations on how useful they are and if it's a good use of time. However, the team that communicates best are the teams that are really going to be able to grow and develop and notice what they're doing well and how they can do things better if they're not doing them so well. So basically what we're looking at is output CPD, which involves so much more of everything that's been done before, with input CPD being that sort of centre part where there's an awful lot less activity actually taking place. So when it comes to planning CPD, there are various levels that the GDC outline in their thing here. So at level 2, which is the lower input level, just a statement of goals and assesses needs, whereas at 3 you've got a planner. Now they're actually going to give us an online planner. This that's been put together here is just a document that anticipates what that will look like. It's not done yet, and I know a lot of people report their CPD online, but that's afterwards. Now we're going to be sort of doing it beforehand in the planning stages. A competency framework, so that we've got something to measure against. Well, of course, that's the standards. Detailed outcomes on career and practice. That is your reflection and your review and how what you've done has made a difference. The elite level there is where you've got patients measuring outcomes, and over more than 1 year of a cycle, so it's continuous, and it actually shows development and a continuous cycle there. And that ultimately the changes affect patients, so that patients feel that they're getting a better deal. Having said that, though, patients measure their dentistry on things that are different to what we measure it on, and that is really where we need to understand patients more, and it's where the standards really are trying to set out a way to do that. One of the things that you would recognise if you did read through the standards is how they're all interlinked with one another. You'll see that as we go through the different subjects today. The communication standards and the consent standards are almost identical in terms of where they're trying to get. So there's a big crossover. Managing complaints is about communication and very often about consent. So they're all very interwoven, that they mesh together. So very often those measuring changes won't be by outcome, it'll just be by the overall global effect of the things that you do. Okay, and as far as activity is concerned, the bottom level they talk about it is just a note of activity. And the second, then you're going to have when it happened, dates of attendance, and go, these are just not acceptable. If that's not acceptable at the moment, just to say, oh well, I did do something at one time. They want to know when, where, why, and some sort of evidence for it. The higher level, really, evidence of participation, quality adjudicated delivery, and points system to identify the quality as connected to your professional development, which is that point, this one that we're looking at here, so that you've got that activity measurement like that. Okay, and just to finish this off, the outcomes. This is where we're heading to now. Objective assessments involving others. Now those others will be patients, there will be colleagues that you work with, so that people are giving you feedback on how you're doing. That was not going to be a comfortable experience, I guess, in some cases. I mean, a lot of things like significant event analysis, which are actually a requirement in a lot of healthcare organisations, private and otherwise. The significant event analysis is often going to point at something that somebody's done that they could have done better, and that's not going to be easy to take. But again, it's requirements, and particularly where you've got the significant, what's the other term that they use? Significant untoward event or something like that. You know, at least with some of them you're looking at positives, but what we need to be able to do really is find ways of actually sharing good practice with other people. And statistical benchmarking based on data on patient outcomes, it's going to be the patients that give us that information. So more and more that the CQC require that we do the patient surveys and satisfaction things, there's going to be another opportunity to use those. Interesting enough to say that the CQC is having a fresh start. Have you seen that? I had a fresh start actually a little while ago and it didn't work, so now they're having a new start. So within the new start,
What does that mean?
it means that they recognise that they're not doing a particularly good job, and they're trying to find ways of sort of going back to the drawing board and sorting it out again. So the first thing that they said, look, we're going to have a fresh start, we're going to do it all differently.
And is everyone
and it did work.
Free for the minute of return visits anytime soon then from CQC?
No, they're still continuing rolling out what they were doing. But what they will be doing is they will be having more dentally trained people that understand dentistry, inspecting dental practices, as a result of pressure from the BDA and the GDC, particularly there. But it really means that these statistical benchmarking, remembering that in outcome 1, you're required to take patients' input about how they experience services. So it means that, you know, everything sort of links together. One of the things that they said they were going to do with the New Start was to get rid of all the different sets of regulations from different places and bring them all in together. So you may have the GDC saying this, you may have the CQC saying that, and you may have the Health and Safety Executive saying the other. And the whole idea is really to sort of mesh them together, but that's not going to happen, is it? Well, that's me being negative, isn't it? But that's what they're thinking about doing anyway.